we're going to have a book talk from Jennifer Horn, who will present her new book, Odyssey of a Wandering Mind, The Strange Tale of Sarah Mayfield, an author. I also want to make sure you're aware that our summer genealogy workshops will be happening again this year in June and July. And so be on the lookout for registration. That's going to be happening, opening up after Memorial Day. So keep a lookout for that. We're going to have 2 workshops this summer. I want to make sure you're aware that our temporary exhibit, the Alabama Rosenwald Schools exhibit, is still open through August of 2024, and that is on our 2nd floor. So if you haven't been there, please make an attempt to go today or come back to see it again. I want to invite you to next month, and I also want to make sure everyone's aware that we had to switch our Food for Thoughts. So our June Food for Thought is going to be presented today by Dr. Revel. And then our Food for Thought that was supposed to be for today, May 16th, is now scheduled for June 20th. And in case you don't remember what that is, Dr. Christina Snyder will come to present on her book, Slavery in Indian Country, The Changing Face of Captivity in Early America. And so that is going to be here on in the Farley Auditorium on June 20th, and it's also going to be streaming live to our Facebook and YouTube channels. Lastly, I'd like to thank the Alabama Humanities Alliance for their grant. All Food for Thought programming is made possible by the Alabama Humanities Alliance and is sponsored by the Friends of the Alabama Archives. Now on to our speaker for today. Dr. Layton Revel is the founder of the Center for the Negro League Baseball Research and the co-founder of the Negro Southern League Museum in Birmingham. Today, he will share the story of the museum and the stories of Black baseball in Birmingham. But I also want to be sure to announce that on June 20th of this year in Birmingham, there will be a Major League Baseball game at Rickwood Field, the oldest professional ballpark in the U.S. And so today, I hope you enjoy Dr. Layton Revel. Please join me in welcoming him.
Really want to thank you all for coming today. This is my first trip to Montgomery, and I had the great pleasure of going through your museum today, and it's just a fabulous institution, and it's something that is a real treasure here. I'd like to do a couple of things today. First of all, tell you a little bit about myself and what we do and kind of what our plans for the future are with museum projects, and then talk with you a little bit about Negro League Baseball in the South and just Negro League Baseball in general. 35 years ago, I was at the Houston Astrodome. I was doing a book signing. I had written a book that combined education and sports. Met an old Negro League Baseball player there, and he and I became very good friends. And long story short, I would go with him to reunions and out to different events and that honored the Negro Leagues, and was very concerned that nothing was being done to preserve the history of Black baseball in America. And when Buck O'Neill was a good friend of mine, and when he was working with Ken Burns on the Negro League component of his Ken Burns' baseball series, they told me, it says, well, Layton, you got to realize 2 things. Number one, there are very few living Negro League ball players left. There's less than 275 players still alive. And I thought, gosh, that's not very many. And then when I was asking about, where are the artifacts? Where are the bats, the balls, the gloves, the uniforms, the trophies? Where are the historical artifacts related to Negro League Baseball? Well, like the answer I got, there was none of those available. Long story short, I made a trip up to New York City, met with Major League Baseball to see, were they going to do anything to address this issue to preserve the legacy of Black baseball in America? And I got a really direct answer. Well, Layton, if we can't make any money off of it, the answer is no. Went up to Cooperstown. I knew the folks up there really well, been there numerous times. And they said, Layton, you got to realize Negro League Baseball is just one component of what we do. And he said, there's a lot of times we have a hard time keeping the doors open here. And I moaned and groaned about it for a period of time. And we were having dinner one night. My son said, well, Dad, if nobody else is doing anything, why don't you do something? And so 35 years ago, we founded the Center for Negro League Baseball Research. We're a 501c3 nonprofit foundation. 2 of the interesting components is that, number one, we have no paid employees. Everybody that works on projects with us devotes and dedicates their time and energies and efforts. We go on a research trip. Everybody pays their own expenses. So You don't make any money in Negro League Baseball. The second thing is we don't solicit donations in that. We don't charge for any of the programs and any of the projects that we do. When I started the Center for Negro League Baseball Research, my first focus was how many ball players are really left out there? Because I knew the Negro American League ended in 1962. And so some of those guys that were playing in the early 60s had to still be in their 60s and had to be alive. Long story short, over the last 35 years, we have found over 1,500 additional ball players that no one knew where they were until we found them. And we were able to document their histories and in many cases purchase artifacts that we put in our museum collection and preserve their legacy. The second major objective for us was to find the historical artifacts that are out there. We knew you're just not going to be able to go to the internet and just go to eBay and buy everything that you wanted to buy. But I did know from having known several ball players, I knew Satchel Paige, I was Buck Leonard's doctor when he had his stroke. I knew a lot of the great ball players that were still with us 35 years ago, that they had a lot of artifacts themselves, and had to be other things out there. Long story short, we over the last 35 years, we probably have collected 95% of the known artifacts related to Black baseball history in America. In addition to that, we've collected a lot of other artifacts. And other than Cooperstown, the Center for Negro League Baseball Research has the largest archives of artifacts in the United States. As time went on, we got involved in a couple of other very important projects. Up until the COVID hit, my partner and I would host a reunion in Birmingham, Alabama every year for the Negro League ball players, and we'd fund the expenses. And we would typically have 50 to 95 ball players that would attend, and it was just a great time. And we did 16 of those events. We do a lot of events where we'll go out to ballparks and set up temporary exhibits or do educational programs like we're having here today, and that has been a very important part of what we do. One of the proudest elements that I have is that Major League Baseball came to me about 18 years ago and said, Dr. Revel, our pension plan for the Negro League Baseball players is a mess. We want to do something about it, and we need somebody from the outside that is non-biased and has a third disinterested party. Would you help us with it? And I told him I'd be happy to help. And so we redrafted the qualifications for a pension, who qualified, what type of documentation we would need to show that they had played in different years. And when we kind of got finished with all of that, the MLB asked me to be the credentialing agent for the pension plan. And their first question is, well, Dr. Revel, how do we pay you? Would you like an honorarium every time, or do we put you on a consulting contract? How do you get paid? And I said, well, I've got a very good practice in Dallas. I own a couple of fairly large companies. I don't need to get paid. But what I'd like you to do is every time we certify a ball player, I'd like you to give them a pension retro check back to the start of the program. Right before COVID, we certified 4 more ball players. Their checks were each $158,000. Over the years, we've certified 48 ball players to receive a Major League Baseball pension. If you played in the major leagues, at least one day, you get $2,800 a month. If you played 4 years in the Negro Leagues, you get a check for $833 a month, which for a lot of these guys is a lot of money. And I remember getting into an argument with some folks at MLB. We were on a conference call, and one of the guys said, I can't understand why we're arguing over all this stuff. $833 a month is nothing. And my response was, well, if you're living on $565 a month Social Security, it's a hell of a lot of money. And I can still, don't get me started on stories. I've got thousands of them that are, every one of them is just as good as the one before. But one of the things that was most meaningful to me that you can't put a dollar figure on, probably the biggest curmudgeon of a ball player was a guy from down in Mobile, and that Frank Marsh. Frank's been gone a number of years, but Frank hated everybody. It didn't matter what color you were, it didn't matter if you're male, female. Frank didn't like people. And he called me and said he was having problems. He wanted to try to get a pension and that. And I told him, I said, well, that's going to be easy, Frank. You are an outstanding ball player. I'll get the process started immediately, and you'll get some information from MLB that you have to sign and everything. And got his pension check, and he calls me the day he got his pension check, just crying like a baby. And I said, Frank. He said, I'm glad to be able to help you with that. And he said, well, Doc, you got to realize this is the first time I've ever been able to go to Walmart, buy my groceries and my medicine at the same time. So, those kinds of things. When people ask me, Layton, why do you do what you do? It's because of the people. It's because that I feel that I'm in a position where I can help preserve the legacy of Negro League Baseball and baseball in general in the United States. 8 years ago, I partnered with the city of Birmingham to build the Negro Southern League Museum. And we're downtown, right behind Regents Field, the new ballpark there. By museum standards, we're big by some standards in that we're the largest African-American sports museum in the country. By standards of going through y'all's museum here, we're a small museum. I've got 8,500 square feet of exhibit space in that. And but we're able to tell the story of Black baseball in America through the eyes of Birmingham, Alabama. And that we opened 8 years ago, and I retired in January and decided I'm 74 years old. According to me, I've got 20 good years left. According to my doctor, no, you don't have that long. But I'm going to go with my diagnosis in that. But I felt, I've got 20 good years left. I want to spend doing something that's incredibly meaningful. And what we do in the museum world is we preserve the history so that generations from now, people can come in, read the history. I had so much fun this morning reading about early Alabama and the Indian population here. I didn't realize the Creeks, I didn't know anything about the Creeks. I know a lot more going home in that. So we have we have a golden opportunity to preserve history as far as museums go. We built the Negro Southern League Museum 8 years ago. Last month, we just completed our first traveling museum on the Birmingham Industrial League. It stays on the road 12 months out of the year, and it tells the story of Industrial League Baseball in Birmingham, which is a very rich story. We are getting ready next week to start on building a museum at Regents Field there in Birmingham, Alabama. And people ask me, gosh, Layton, the stadium's already built. Where are you going to put a museum? You're going to have portable buildings outside or one thing or another? I said, no. What I plan on doing is, I had a good friend a number of years ago, passed away a number of years ago. Some of you older folks may remember. Do you remember Roger Maris? Baseball player. Roger was a friend of mine. And he called me one night. He said, Layton, he said, the folks up in Fargo want to build a museum to me, and they want all my baseball stuff and that. And he said, I don't deserve a museum. I had one good year, and I wish the hell I hadn't had that. He said, I just enjoyed being a ball player. And what we ended up coming up with, I came up with an idea. They got a big mall there. And in any big space, you have what I call dead areas. So in the mall, we took all the dead areas in the mall there in Fargo, and they built the Roger Maris Museum. And I'm taking that concept and doing that with Regents Field. We're taking dead areas in the museum, in the ballpark, and putting high quality museum level cases, museum quality artifacts that will tell the story of the Birmingham Barons, the white team there in Birmingham that started in 1885 in the Southern Association. And you'll do a walking tour of the museum, and each dead area there'll be 8 or 10 foot wide museum case there with wonderful historical artifacts that we've collected in that over the years. And we plan on doing quite a few more of those as time goes on in that. So we're very blessed to be able to preserve the legacy of baseball in this part of the country. But what I wanted to talk to you mainly about, and I'm going to leave some time at the end for questions, and that is our museum in Birmingham. As I said, I wanted to tell the story of Black baseball in America through the eyes of Birmingham, Alabama, because when people think of Negro League Baseball, they automatically think of Josh Gibson, they think of Satchel Paige, they think of Jackie Robinson, and they think of the big teams like the Homestead Grays or the Kansas City Monarchs, the Indianapolis Clowns, and they were all very good teams. They all had a very rich history. You know, we say that Rube Foster was the father of Black baseball in America. And to an extent, that's a true statement. He was an outstanding ball player when he was young. He was the best pitcher in Black baseball during his playing days. He ended up owning the Chicago American Giants, was a phenomenal owner. He organized the Negro National League in 1920. He held a meeting of all the big owners from the North and the East and in Kansas City, Missouri, and formed the Negro National League. What a lot of people don't recognize, though, is that less than 2 months after Rube Foster founded the Negro National League, Frank Perdue, who owned the Birmingham Black Barons, founded the Negro Southern League. So right on the heels of the Negro National League, the Negro Southern League came. And if you can go back to the 1920s and that, transportation, very difficult. You know, we don't have, you didn't have airplane travel. Railroad travel was a difficult proposition, and that as to where they went. It was just hard to get around. And so baseball was significantly more regional back in those days than it is today. And that's one of the reasons that when you look at the Negro Southern League, if you were an African American, if you were a person of color and wanted to play baseball in the South, the Negro Southern League was the highest level of competition that you could play at. Now, some of the players would go on and go up north and play for the big teams because they would offer more money or better opportunities. But the Negro Southern League, which included Montgomery had a team, the Montgomery Grays. Knoxville had a team, the Giants. New Orleans had the Creoles and the Black Pelicans. Birmingham had the Black Barons. Little Rock had the Travelers, and there were a significant number of teams over the years that played in the Negro Southern League. And I get asked the question all the time of, Layton, why would you build a museum in Birmingham, Alabama? The answer for me is real simple. If I got to choose any place in the United States to build a museum that would be the most historically important, it would be Birmingham, Alabama. The Birmingham Black Barons were formed in 1919. They played through the end of the Negro American League, which was 1962. Then they played 2 more seasons of independent baseball. The Birmingham Black Barons played more seasons of Negro League baseball than any other Black baseball team in the country. And we've identified over 1,200 other teams that played at one time or another. Second reason is more ball players came from Birmingham, the Birmingham Industrial League, that went into Negro League baseball than anywhere else. In Birmingham, we have 5 former Negro League ball players that went on to play. All of them played in the major leagues, and they all ended up in Cooperstown in the Hall of Fame. Willie Mays was from Fairfield, Alabama. Willie Mays' father, Cat Mays, had played for the Birmingham Black Barons in the 1920s. One of the projects we haven't really announced yet, and you'll be some of the first people to hear it. I'm in the process of buying Willie Mays' boyhood home there in Fairfield. It had a fire in it a number of years ago, hasn't been repaired. It needs one of everything. I don't know if we've got anybody in construction here, but it needs a new roof, it needs a new floor, it needs new walls, it needs doors, windows. Other than that, it's good to go. We're going to move the house like they did in Mobile, Alabama, where Hank Aaron is from. Hank Aaron played with the Indianapolis Clowns, greatest home run hitter of all times, in my estimation. The folks in Mobile moved his boyhood home in Mobile to the ballpark down there. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to be putting Willie Mays' house right across the street there from Rickwood Field. So we'll be building the Willie Mays Museum in that house. It'll be a different type of museum, but it'll be his boyhood home. It'll be a national park site, and it'll be a good opportunity for people to really see that Willie Mays' history. In addition to Willie Mays and Hank Aaron, we had Willie McCovey, played for a short period of time with the Birmingham Black Barons before being cut by James Kennedy, who said he couldn't play ball. Then he went to the San Francisco Giants. He's in the National Baseball Hall of Fame. We have Billy Williams from Mobile that went with the Cubs and played for the Cubs for a number of years. And then, of course, from Mobile, we have Satchel Paige. And besides those individuals, there were a tremendous number of other great ball players that came from Alabama and played most of their baseball careers in the South. The third reason that we chose Birmingham is what you see here, is we see Rickwood Field. Rickwood Field was built in 1910. Yeah, Rickwood Field was built in 1910 by an industrialist there in Birmingham who owned an iron company, and it's still active today. In fact, on June 20th, we will help Major League Baseball host a Major League Baseball game at Rickwood Field. So Rickwood Field was the home of the Birmingham Barons from 1910 to they moved to Hoover and then moved to Regents Field. It was the home of the Birmingham Black Barons from 1910 until the team ended in 1964. The fourth reason that we chose Birmingham was the sheer numbers of ball players. When we started looking at this project 10 years ago, there were 35 former Negro League players that lived in the metropolitan Birmingham area. The big dilemma that we have right now is that we are losing ball players at an alarming rate. When we're doing this game with MLB, MLB wants to do the game as a tribute to the Negro Leaguers. And MLB asked me, well, Dr. Bell, how many players are still alive? And I said, well, we haven't gone over our list in a while since COVID, to be honest with you. But he said, I've got two guys that's all they do, is they look for where people who pass away, people that have moved, what are their phone numbers. I've got two guys that's their passion in life. That's a strange passion, but that's their passion. And we culled our list down to 100, it was 358. When we got it culled down from the period of COVID to 2 months ago, it had gone down to 156. In the last 2 months, we've lost 10 ball players. So we're losing the players at an alarming rate. We'll have about 60 players in attendance at the ball game that the fans will be able to enjoy. And I'll tell you just kind of a little secret. How far is it from here to Birmingham if you drive it?
90 miles.
That's not very far, I knew. The best part of this whole event with MLB is not the ball game. They're going to have 3 ball games. The Friends of Rick, we're going to have the Rickwood Classic, which they have every year, and I think they're playing the Tennessee Smokies, if I'm not mistaken. And then there's supposedly going to be a celebrity all-star game, softball game, and then the big game is on Thursday. The best part of the whole event, though, is the hotel, because all these players gather in the hotel. There's a little, we'll have a little suite for them there that they'll have refreshments and stuff. But just sitting there listening to these old guys talk about their stories of what it was like playing back in the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, and what they had to do and what they had to overcome to be a professional baseball player. So if you don't get a ticket to the ball game, if you want to really immerse yourself into Negro League baseball, just show up at the hotel. Yeah, you don't even have to stay there. You just stay down in the lobby, and that's where you'll find me 99.9% of the time there is with the ball players. But as I said, our goal when we built the museum was to look at professional baseball in Birmingham and how that related to the entire United States. Professional Negro League baseball can be dated back to the 1860s when the Cuban X-Giants were formed. They weren't Cuban and they weren't Giants, but it sounded good. The name Cuban. They were a group of waiters and that from the Argyle Hotel and Babylon Hotel in upstate New York. But they were the first professional black baseball team in the United States. And this proves as a good example. I've heard so many stories about and been so much discouraging words of, well, you can't find this, you can't find that. I decided about 2 years ago that I was going to go back and research the first Cuban Giants baseball team. And I figured out pretty quickly they played about 165 games. I found over 95% of their games. And we've done a book up on it. We download all the books that we published, and we published 100 and something books in that over the years. We download those to our major website, the CNLBR, which is under construction right now. We're having to put it in new formats because it's outdated, evidently, the website. But we download those. People can go online, read them for free. But you can trace professional baseball back in the South to 1895. There was, for a short period of time, there was a league in the South. Birmingham had a team in that league. They were the Birmingham Unions. League didn't make it through the summer. And in the early 1900s, a gentleman by the name of Charles Isham Taylor moved to Birmingham. He had played ball at Clark College. He had 3 brothers who played ball. He was the weakest ball player of the bunch, but he was an outstanding manager, and he formed a team called the Birmingham Giants, and they were there for 6 or 8 years. They were the Southern colored baseball champions for several of those years. And in 1908, Taylor decides to move the team from Birmingham to the Indianapolis area, because there were more opportunities there with the resort hotels. And the last thing he did before he left town was he proposed to a young lady by the name of Olivia Harris Taylor. And she moved with him to Indianapolis. And one of the reasons we do what we do is that a lot of the information that you read out there, if you just pull a book off the bookshelf at the library, I guess libraries still have books, don't they? Or if you go on virtually and look it up. But one of the problems I have with the subject area of Negro League Baseball, there's a lot of the people that have written are just copying what other people wrote. If somebody makes a mistake, that mistake gets repeated kind of over and over again. And Olivia Harris Taylor is a good example of that. She's a Birmingham native, an Alabama native. And a number of years ago, when Cooperstown inducted that a large group of former Negro League players into the National Baseball Hall of Fame, they announced that they were inducting Effa Manley from Newark, because she was the first woman to own a Negro League baseball team. In 1939, they formed the Newark Eagles. Unfortunately, that was an incorrect statement. The first woman to own a Negro League baseball team was Olivia Taylor. In 1922, her husband died unexpectedly. And in 22, 23, 24, she owned the Indianapolis ABCs. So a big part of our work at the museum and with our research teams are to document correctly the history of black baseball in America. And that's never really been done. We've got some good groups out there that are working on some really good projects, like the Seamheads group. If you go on their website, if you look at their statistics and one thing and another, it's all based on box scores. And that's, for us, we have to have primary source documentation. A story that somebody told a story to, that told it to somebody else, doesn't have a lot of historical accuracy. As I had mentioned, if you kind of follow the baseball in Birmingham, 1919, the Birmingham Black Barons are formed. They were an independent team their first year. 1920, they're a charter member of the Negro Southern League. Over the course of their existence, they played in the Negro National League, the Negro American League, and the Negro Southern League. They played pretty much everywhere. And we were very fortunate to have a lot of really good ball players that came through Birmingham. Willie Mays being probably the biggest of all of them. He was like 16 years old in 1948 when the Birmingham Barons won the Negro American League Championship and played the Homestead Grays for in the Negro League World Series. In the museum, we also look at the impact that segregation and integration had on Major League Baseball and then just baseball in general. And if you're a baseball historian, if you're a Southern League fan, if you go back to 1962, you will find there's no Birmingham Barons team in 62 or 63. And the question always is, what happened? Well, what happened was at the end of the 61 season, a federal judge tells the owner of the Birmingham Barons, you have to integrate next season. Don't integrate, you go to jail. So the owner of the team goes to Bull Connor, who's the commissioner of public safety, explains his problem to Bull, and Bull gives it to the city attorneys to deal with. And city attorneys come back with, well, there's nothing in this court order that says that we have to field a team. So in 62 and 63, there was no team. In 63, Charlie Finley, who owned the Kansas City Athletics, was from the Birmingham area, bought the franchise rights to the Barons. And in 64, the Barons integrated with Stanley Jones, who was from Bessemer and played with the Birmingham Black Barons, with John Blue Moon Odom from Macon, South Carolina, with two Latin ball players, Santiago Rosario from Puerto Rico, Bert Campaneris from Cuba. And then he sent Tommy, my friend Tommy Reynolds was playing for the Kansas City Athletics. He sent Tommy down from the major league team to play on the Barons team because he wanted somebody with a good bat in the lineup and the leadership skills to help his new team come along. So, you know, in the museum, we look at the importance of the whole process of integration and what it meant to Birmingham. And, you know, there's a couple of beautiful posters in your museum out there that talks about the importance of history. That if we don't learn from history, we can't move forward. If we don't learn from history, we'll make the same mistakes. But it says it extremely eloquently, more than I could. But one of my favorite pictures in the museum is there's a postcard about that big of a little league baseball team. They were called the Irondale Travelers. And 1960. Before the start of the 1960 Little League season, the Irondale Travelers, a group from Birmingham, a group of citizens from Birmingham burns their baseball park down, burns across in all the kids' yards of the kids' houses, threatens their coach was the only black taxi in Irondale was his taxi, and he gets death threats that if he coaches the team. Long story short, the kids want to play, and they didn't have a ball field, so they became the Travelers. They never played a home game, but all 13 of the kids that played on the ball club crammed in this guy's taxi, and they drove him around. But it really talks to the spirit of baseball. One of the things that has endeared me to the Negro League ball players is they weren't in it for big money contracts. You couldn't make a living as a Negro League baseball, even if you were a big star. The only exception to that rule was Satchel Paige. Satchel was probably the greatest self-promoter of all time. I was fortunate. I got to spend time with him for about 15 years, and that when I would go up to his house in Kansas City. he was actually the highest paid athlete in the United States because he never had a contract. He would play, he wanted to get paid after, he got $500 a game. He wanted to get paid either before or after the game. And, but for most of these guys, playing baseball, they didn't make a lot of money. And if you played baseball and if you were good, you would play 12 months out of the year. You'd play the Negro National League season, then you'd go to California and play in the California Winter League, or you'd go to Latin America and play in the Dominican Republic, the Dominican Republic Winter League, the Cuban Winter League. You'd play in Puerto Rico, you'd play in Venezuela, you would play other places in that. So you played baseball basically 12 months out of the year. There's an old documentary that was done probably 30 years ago that's entitled "The Sun Always Shines Somewhere." Best documentary that's ever been done on Negro League Baseball. And it really speaks to that issue of you played baseball your entire life. The dilemma for these guys was if you were really good and played and had a long career, when your career was over, you didn't have a lot of job opportunities. You didn't go to college. There was only one manager for a team, so not everybody could be a team manager. And a lot of great ball players basically died in obscurity. And then you have a large number of ball players that if you look at them, they only played maybe 1 or 2 seasons. I've got a friend in Dallas who's still alive, Lucius Williams, played parts of 2 seasons for 48 and 49 with the Memphis Red Sox. And I asked him, well, Lucius, why'd you only play 2 years? And he said, well, Layton, it took, by the end of the second year, I figured out pretty quickly, if I'm going to make a living and have a family, I got to go to college. And so he went to college, got his engineering degree, and ended up owning the largest African-American engineering firm in the Southwest. And there were a lot of guys that quit early on because you couldn't make a living at it. Probably my favorite story, I was interviewing a guy one time who was 102 years old, Ernest T. McMillan. And he had played for the 1924 Cleveland Red Sox. And I asked him, I said, Ernest, what happened? I said, you played in 24. The Red Sox were the colored champions of the United States in 24. You were considered one of the best second basemen in the country. And then there's nothing else mentioned. Did you get hurt? What happened? He said, no, Doc, it's a funny story. He said, we had just won the championship, and the guy that owned the team, he owned the hotel, and we stayed at the hotel. And he said, I was downtown at the lunch counter having my lunch and that. And about halfway through lunch, prettiest young lady in the world sits down next to me. And he said, we got to talking back and forth, and I finally got up the nerve when her lunch, she'd finished her lunch, to ask her. She said, young lady, would you mind if I called on you? She said, well, that depends. And he says, okay, what's the depend on? She says, well, what do you do for a living? And he couldn't have asked me a better question than that. He said, I play second base for the world champion Cleveland Red Sox. And she said, well, just back on off. She said, I don't want anything to do with a ball player or a traveling man. And he said, Doc, I couldn't sleep all night. He said, I just think about that girl got prettier as the night went on. And he said, I decided before it got light that I was going to make a change. And he said, he called it his ball suit. He said, I folded my ball suit up. He said, the owner came in at 6 o'clock. I met him there and told him I wasn't coming back, and went across town. He said, I had a cousin that worked for the B&O Railroad, and he told me, he said, Ernest, you ever need a job? He said, I'll get you with the boss man here. I'll vouch for you, and I can get you a job at the railroad. So he goes over there at the railroad, gets hired on, and rushes back across town, just hoping that little girl's still going to be there at the lunch counter. And he said, Doc, opened that door, and she just looks lovely as ever. And I said, well, what'd you do, Ernest? He said, well, it was real. He said, walked up to her. I put my hand out. I said, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Ernest T. McMillan. I work for the B&O Railroad. And I said, well, did you ever regret it? He said, not for the 76 years we were married. So, what's in it for me are stories like that. Like I said, I've got literally thousands of them where people, how baseball impacted their life positively, or how in some cases it changed their lives. And, we're very honored and blessed to preserve the legacy of the Negro Leagues. And we got about 15, 20 minutes left. I'd like to see if y'all have any questions about the museum, Negro League Baseball. Yes, sir.
This picture fascinates me, the old vehicles there. Do you know the date this was taken or which would be?
Well, look at the cars. The cars look they're from the 20s. So I think sometime probably in the 20s. Yes, sir.
Who are the oldest and youngest that you're aware of who still survive?
The oldest surviving Negro League ball player is 99 years old. That's Bill Greason. He's from Birmingham, Alabama. Bill's accomplishments. He was played for the Birmingham Black Barons. He had a cup of coffee with the St. Louis Cardinals. So he was a Major League Baseball player also. He's a Tuskegee Airman. He has a PhD in theology. He is one of the leading religious leaders in the South. 99 years old, he'll still get up at church occasionally and give the message. Still teaches a Sunday school class. He's the oldest player. Tony Lloyd is probably the youngest, and he's in his mid-70s. The oldest player, though, now that you bring that up, I've got a quick story for you. I get a call from a friend of mine who in Denver. He said, Layton, I found several ball players. He gave me the names. He said, I saved the best for last. He said, I'm pretty darn sure that this guy, Silas Simmons, is 110 years old. I thought, really? And I said, well, we've got a genealogist friend up in Boston that can figure that stuff out real quickly. So I call him the next day, come find it. This guy's 110 years old. So 2 days later, I get on a plane, go down to Florida, go to the nursing home, introduce myself to the medical director and the nurse. And I said, I'm here. I like to talk with Silas Simmons because he's the oldest living professional, maybe athlete of all times. And she said, oh, we've known Silas ever since he moved to Florida. I said, I don't think he played any baseball. I said, well, how old was he when he moved down here? He said, well, he was 76. So I finally convinced, I said, well, as a doctor, rehab's my specialty. I deal with people every day that don't want to go back to work or trying to figure out how not to go back to work. I said, I'd like to figure out how he's done it and what his secret is for being around as long as he did. They finally let me talk to him, and we talked, and I always take a book with me of pictures from the time period that the ball player played. And he was thumbing through the book, and he named every picture in there, and he gets this one picture and he stops. It's a picture of the first Homestead Grays team. And I only know the name of one player in the team. His name was Cumberland Posey. He was African-American, but he was extremely light-skinned, and he's very recognizable. But Silas stops at this photo and he says, boy, this brings back memories, Doc. I said, how so, Silas? He said, well, I remember the day this picture was taken. He said, see this good-looking guy on the end? That's me. And he went on to name every player in the photograph. When I left Florida, I talked with the folks at the nursing home. I said, I'd like to come down. I said, Monty Irvin's still alive. He lives in Florida. I've talked to him. He'd like to meet Silas. And we probably have 50, 60 ball players we'd like to host a birthday party for him. And so we hosted his 111th birthday party. And I had my genealogy group in that go through, find all of his living relatives. Both of his wives had gone. All of his children were gone. All but one of his grandchildren were gone. But we ended up with about 40-something people down there. And we had his 111th birthday party. And the Tampa Devil Rays, the manager and the coaches came out and signed Silas to a one-day contract and brought him his own Tampa Bay jersey. And they asked me, what was Silas's number? I said, well, back when Silas played, a lot of times they didn't have numbers. And so they decided to make his number 111. He died like 2 weeks after his birthday party. But I just look at just having the opportunity to visit with somebody. We allowed a small group of reporters there, one from the Boston Globe was a friend of mine, one from the New York Times, and they asked him, said, Silas, what's your most memorable event? You've been around a long time. What's the most memorable thing that sticks out to you? He said, well, when those Wright brothers took off and made that plane flight, that was pretty amazing. I thought, but, yes.
I was just going to make sure to make sure everyone knew that the picture that's on the screen is actually from the Alabama Media Group collection here at the Department of Archives and History. It was taken for Birmingham News in 1928.
Oh, okay, 1920s.
Yes, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
I have two questions. One, have you been able to determine whether any non-Black players played in the Negro League?
Yes. There were 4 players that played for the Chicago American Giants. In 1950, Dr. Martin, who owned the Chicago American Giants, he was seeing his roster depleted by the white Major League Baseball was coming in taking his best players. So he got the idea, I'm going to recruit white ball players. And he signed 4 ball players in that. One of them is still alive today, Louis Clarizio. He's alive in Chicago. And then depending on how you define Negro League Baseball, the Negro American League ended in 1962, but there were regional leagues like the South Texas Negro League. It went to 1979. And there were several white ball players that played in that league. And the Gulf Coast Negro League went to 1984, and there were several white ball players that played with that league. One of the great things about baseball is, doesn't matter how old you are, doesn't matter what the color of your skin is, if you can play ball, you get an opportunity to play ball. And I can remember visiting with Willie Mays' son about what it was like, what his dad talked about was like when he was 14, 15 years old playing for the Fairfield Stars. His dad was playing center field. So you had a 14-year-old and a 45-year-old playing in the same starting lineup.
My second question is, since you said that MLB in Cooperstown told you that unless it made money for them, that they weren't interested in your first proposal.
Mm-hmm.
How did you ultimately get them to do pensions, put Negro League ball players in the Hall of Fame and otherwise?
Yeah, a lot of that has been through proving what you can do. And I am a tremendous supporter of Major League Baseball. Major League Baseball did not have to put the pension plan in place. They got into it originally through Joe Black, who had played in the Negro Leagues and he had played in the major leagues, and they had made a mess of it. And they owned up to this just didn't work, but we want to do it. And for us, they've seen what we've been able to produce over the years. In corporate America, they don't buy great ideas or flowery proposals. They want to see, what have you done? And we've been able to show them that through the research that we've done, plus from our museum in Birmingham. It's like I said, by museum standards, it's the largest African-American sports museum in the country. If you haven't had a chance to visit it, spend some time there because you'll see the real treasure. I've got Satchel Paige's uniform on display. We have the oldest trophy. It's the McAllister Cup from 1919. We have the oldest contract, which is from 1907. We have just a tremendous number of very historical pieces and treasures. Question in the back.
Hello. Were there ever any women who played or attempted to play baseball?
Yes. And to expand on that a little bit, this is why we do what we do. When I started this project, I was told there were 3 women that played. There was Toni Stone, who was one hell of a good ball player. There was Connie Morgan, who was really good looking. She wasn't much of a ball player, but she was really good looking in a uniform. And there was Mamie Peanut Johnson. There were 3 women that played. And in many cases, when you're talking to historians, you're reading stuff in the paper, part of you has to take that as being correct. Well, when we got into investigating it, we found there were actually 9 women that had played. And 9 women had played in the Negro American League, and there were 9 women that had played in the Negro Southern League. Toni Stone played in both of them, and she was by far the best ball player of all of them. But yeah, and women played, the role that women play is tremendously important. My wife was a university professor, and she travels with me all the time, except for today. We've got grandchildren that need her help. But Linda, I'll visit with the ball player and get their story. Linda will visit with the wife and get their story. And quite often, they don't really match up all that well. Because if you think about it, we didn't have cell phones back in those days. Your husband would take off. He'd be gone for months at a time. You may or may not get money in the mail. You didn't know when he was going to be back. You had to run the family. And then in addition to that, especially the lower that you go down in levels of ball, like if you get down to the bush leagues, like the South Texas Negro League, what kept the South Texas Negro Leagues going were women. They had a women's auxiliary that they raised money for the uniforms, they raised money to take care of the ballpark, they raised money to feed the ball players, they raised money for everything. Then when the games were over with, they had food and they had for parties and entertainment. In addition to that, women were huge fans. I have a book that I've written on women in the Negro Leagues, and we'll be downloading hopefully within the next 2 months to our website that goes into great detail of the role that women played, but they were extremely important. And plus women owned teams. There were quite a few women that owned teams. I told you about Olivia Effa Manley and Olivia Taylor. Dr. Bolden Shorter, who was the premier pediatric doctor in Philadelphia. Her dad was Ed Bolden, that owned the Philadelphia Stars. When Ed died, she inherited the Stars and ran them for several years amongst all the other things that she did. But I love Dr. Shorter because she'd always appear in every team picture. She'd be there in a beautiful sundress and a big hat, look about as out of place as humanly possible. But she was the owner of the team. Yes, ma'am.
Have you identified any survivors in Montgomery County, survivors of the Negro?
Montgomery County. Jim Gray is still alive. I know that because I talk to him about every other day. Well, there's at least one ball player that's still with us. Yes, sir.
You mentioned Bull Connor.
Mm-hmm.
I know he was a baseball broadcaster. Did he do the Bear?
No. Shelley, the Playboy Stewart, was the primary announcer there. He was known for his platter parties, where for a nickel you could come in and he'd spin records like a disc jockey, and then he was the announcer for a lot of the games for the team.
But you don't know who Connor?
No, he never announced a Negro League game. I know that.
And just for our online audience, the question was about Bull Connor.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. You said it ended in 62. Did most of them go over to the major leagues, or did they go to the other Negro leagues that was there?
Most of them went on the league end.
It was Birmingham Blackberries in 63 and 64. It was also a Kansas City Monarchs in Barnesville in the late 60s. The Philadelphia Stars team in Barnesville in the late 60s. Some of those players went there for those other teams, but most of them went to work because you still make a living. And the guy, if you were the hardest thing for me to deal with is I get asked,
Wasn't it great? 1947, Jackie Robinson broke in and broke the color barrier, and baseball was open to everyone. I thought, no, it was terrible. And I said, and that doesn't come from me. That comes from my friends who played. Because if you were an impact player, if you were a Willie Mays, an Ernie Banks, a Roy Camp, If you were a great ball player, there was a place for you in the major league.
If you were a Bill Fireball, there was an average ball player, no, not Jim. I've got a friend, Lomax Davis. Lomax is gone. He hit 423 on the season. How did he hit? It was playing class D ball. You got somebody hitting 423. They may have some skills. My good friend Jake Sanders, he got signed to Brooklyn to the Dodgers. They sent him to Iowa for spring training. He's leading the team in hit. He can run, he can throw, he's leading the team. When the final cuts come out for the season, Jake Sanders on the list. When Jake asked about why he got cut, he said, "We don't need any more black ball players in the Dodgers organization." So was it fair? No. Tell me, and I guess you'll like your lot of sports fans here. Jackie breaks in 1947. The last team to integrate was the Boston Red Sox, 1959. How did it take 12 or 13 years for every baseball organization to find one good black ball player? Yeah. And the Yankees, well, I was a big Yankee fan growing up. The Yankees didn't integrate until 1955. And the player that integrated was Elston Howard. And the big headline you saw across New York, I think was Casey Stengel quoted, the Yankees finally sign a, using the N-word, and he can't run. You know, I mean, it was hard coming up during those early years of integration. And I consider integration starting in the late 80s. It actually starts in the mid-40s, and so things that led up to the late 40s through the late 50s, and even through the early 60s. There were a lot of challenges if you were a player of golf.
I think we have time for one more question if there's anyone else.
Yes, ma'am.
How did you get so passionate about this? When you chosen?
Well, I got paid. I met a ball player first of all. I've always been a big sports enthusiast. Believe it or not, at one time, I was a pretty darn good basketball player. I played college basketball, played a couple years of semi-pro college, semi-pro basketball, and tried the Spurs. Obviously didn't make it. But education's always been very important to me, or wouldn't be an option. Sports and athletics has always been important to me. And when I played 1 year semi-pro football with San Antonio Torres. Knew I wasn't going to the NFL. I just loved playing football. So I love sports, and I felt education was very important. And as I got to meet more of the ball players, I've interviewed over 1,700 ball players in my 35 years. And I get the same story from everyone. They played baseball because they loved the game. Not one player that I've interviewed has had a poor, pitiful me story, I got screwed story, that they have a negative impact of why they never got chosen to go to the major leagues. The people themselves, the players themselves, endear me to baseball. And I had a wonderful experience just a couple, 3 weeks ago. MLB calls me and said, "Layton, I'd like to ask a favor of you." I said, "Ryan Howard," I don't know if you all remember Ryan Howard, Philadelphia Phillies, Rookie of the Year, second year, he's the National League most valuable player in 58 home runs. Big star in Major League Baseball. He said he's coming to Birmingham. We're going to give out golden tickets to all the guys that live in Birmingham. And he wants to come himself because he wanted to meet the ball players. They didn't pay him to come to Birmingham. He wanted to meet the ball players. And it was very meaningful to him. He wanted to be able to thank all the ball players himself for the opportunities that he had from what they had created as a foundation for him. And it was really funny. I'll tell the story of what I was saying. We go into the first house, and Ryan stops dead in his tracks. And I said, "Ryan, are you okay?" He said, "Yeah, I'm back to being 6 years old in my grandmother's living room. That had the cellophanes on the couch and everything." And that was, it was like it was a time warp of 40 years. But really appreciate being here today. If you get a chance to make it to Birmingham, visit our Negro Southern League Museum. By the end of this baseball season, Birmingham Barons and Southern League Museum Stadium will be open there at the ballpark. We hope to see you there. Hopefully by the end of the year, we're going to have our Willie Mays Museum going also. Pleasure being Eddie. Pleasure talking with y'all.
Thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it.
Appreciate me next.
And I appreciate all of you for coming out and hearing this wonderful story. And if you haven't had a chance, there is a temporary exhibit out in our Malone lobby about baseball in Alabama. And also in our museum store, we have some selected books about baseball in Alabama. So I hope you go and visit that as well. I hope to see you all back here next month on June 20th for Dr. Snyder's presentation on slavery in Indian country. Thank you.